And yet another very lovely morning out there to all of you, my dearest friends. We left off in Ezekiel 18, speaking on how the soul that sinneth shall die. And how the Lord says, all souls are mine. Now we pick up in Ezekiel 19. Moreover, take thou up a lamentation for the princes of Israel, the rulers, and say, what is thy mother? A lioness. She lay down among lions. She nourished her whelps among young lions. Notice how it says that this is a lamentation for these princes. The expression here alludes to the mournful songs sung at funerals. Such a lamentation the prophet is directed to apply to the mournful condition of Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah. And once again, these are the offspring of the great king Josiah, and they're the final kings before the Babylonian captivity. So just to clarify once again, the mother and the whelps. The mother is Judea, a lioness, as being fierce in catching prey, referring to her heathenish practices. Nourished, it says, among young lions. These whelps are nourished among young lions. She herself had lain among lions, that is, had intercourse with the corruptions of the surrounding heathen, and had brought up the royal young ones similarly. Verse 3, and she brought up one of her whelps. It became a young lion, and it learned to catch the prey. It devoured men. The nations also heard of him. He was taken in their pit, and they brought him with chains unto the land of Egypt. Now it's believed that this first one mentioned is Jehoahaz, who we are told followed not the good example of his father Josiah, but the evil practices of the wicked kings, his predecessors, Manasseh, Ahaz, all of these evil kings. And though we have no further account of his acts, yet from this there is sufficient reason to suppose that he was injurious to his neighbors, which possibly was the reason why Pharaoh Necho of Egypt deposed him after he had reigned only 3 months. Verse 5. Now when she saw that she had waited, and her hope was lost, then she took another of her whelps, and made him a young lion. And he went up and down among the lions. He became a young lion, and learned to catch the prey, and devoured men. And he knew their desolate palaces, and he laid waste their cities. And the land was desolate, and the fullness thereof by the noise of his roaring. Then the nations set against him on every side from the provinces, and spread their net over him. He was taken in their pit. Now this is speaking of right after Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, who reigned for 11 years. And they put him in ward and chains, and brought him to the king of Babylon. Very important note right here, don't pass this up. How they brought him not to Babylon, it says, but they brought him to the king of Babylon. It's believed that Nebuchadnezzar, he wasn't in Babylon during his conquest time. We know that because of what happened in the days of Zedekiah in the final Babylonian captivity. But they brought him to the king of Babylon. They brought him into holds, that his voice should no more be heard upon the mountains of Israel. Once again, to the king of Babylon, wherever he was, for some dispute it whether now in Babylon or elsewhere with some of his armies, more likely. However, this unhappy king Jehoiakim was carried to Nebuchadnezzar, or died on the way, perhaps by command of Nebuchadnezzar, and then they cast him out unburied. That is what's believed of this evil king Jehoiakim. Verse 10, thy mother is like a vine in thy blood, planted by the waters. She was fruitful and full of branches by reason of many waters, and she had strong rods for the scepters of them that bear rule. And her stature was exalted among the thick branches, and she appeared in her height with the multitude of her branches. Now, of course, with this symbolism, we still see how the mother is Judea. And it's speaking about how blessed and prosperous that she was, even from her very beginning. But she was plucked up in fury. She was cast down to the ground, and the east wind dried up her fruit. Speaking of Babylon, her strong rods were broken and withered. The fire consumed them, and now she is planted in the wilderness in a dry and thirsty ground. Dry and thirsty ground, such was Babylon to Israel in its national relations. And even after the return from the exile, the Jews never rose again to much importance among the nations of the earth. But meantime, they were being disciplined, that at least a few of them might be prepared for the planting among them of that kingdom not of this world. Verse 14. And fire is gone out of a rod of her branches, which hath devoured her fruit, so that she hath no strong rod to be a scepter to rule. This is a lamentation, and shall be for a lamentation. Now, of course, this is speaking of the halting of the Davidic line after Zedekiah. After the Babylonian captivity, there would be no Davidic king until Christ sits upon the throne.